Okay, the Book of Job, and this is our third week in our study here. This is the outline of the whole book that we're following, and we're still in the first section here, the prologue, which is the testing of Job, and this covers the first two chapters in the book. And here's a more detailed outline of this section. We looked at the first two scenes last week. The book begins with us being introduced to Job, and we're told of his family background, his family circumstances, and the wealth that Job enjoyed, and the blessings that that God had bestowed upon him there. He was described at the end of verse 3 as being a man who was wealthier than anyone in the East. So he's this prominent character. He has 10 children altogether, 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he has a lot of livestock, cattle and sheep. And he's a man of good character. We were told of his character there as well, that he's described as being one who was blameless and upright, a man who feared God and shunned that which was evil. And then we had a second scene which showed us events taking place in the presence of the Lord in chapter 1, verses 6 to 12, where the sons of God, or angels, or divine beings, some kind of spiritual beings, assembled before God, and amongst them was one who's named as the adversary, or the Satan. And we spoke a little bit last week about that word Satan and how it is used in other parts of the Bible as well. And this test, this challenge that was put forward, that God pointed out to the adversary the good character of Job, and the adversary's argument was, well, Job is only good because you protect him and you bless him. But if you take those things away, then he will curse you to his face. And that was the test that was to be applied to Job. The Lord allowed the adversary to do what he wanted, only he was not to lay a hand upon Job. And so at verse 12, where we finished last week, the adversary departed then from the presence of the Lord. So this evening, we're going to look at the rest of this section here, and these final 4 scenes in which we'll see the afflictions which are imposed upon Job and his reaction to them. And then we go back to another scene taking place in the presence of the Lord, again in chapter 2, and then the physical affliction that Job suffers. And then at the end there, the arrival of Job's friends who come onto the scene. Before we go into that, though, I just want to follow up on something from last week, and this concerns the name Lucifer that was mentioned last week. And it's often a name that we associate with Satan, but who is Lucifer? The only place where the name is found in our English translations comes from the authorized version, from Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12. And the verse reads, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations?" Now, we mentioned last week, some commentators apply this passage in Isaiah chapter 14 to Satan and his fall from heaven, and particularly there in verse 12, that fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, and the name Lucifer then being applied to Satan from this verse. The word Lucifer means light bearer, something along those lines. But the name itself, Lucifer, the word Lucifer, is the Latin translation that is found in the Vulgate, the Latin version of the Bible. And it's a translation from the Hebrew word Hellel, and the word Hellel means shining one. In the Greek translation, which is called the Septuagint, abbreviated to LXX, the Roman numerals for 70, the Greek word that is used there is Sophros, translated of the Hebrew word Hellel. And again, it means that shining one or light bearer, something of that kind. But other more recent translations in the English do not use the name Lucifer, but rather they translate it as day star or morning star or star of the morning. Those are some of the versions that translate it that way. And the morning star is is the planet Venus, a name applied to the planet Venus because it appears just before the sun rises in the east and it sets in the west. So the application of this name Lucifer to Satan is in doubt because the passage where the word is used in the authorized version coming from the Latin there in Isaiah chapter 14 is not talking about Satan at all. Rather, it's talking about the king of Babylon and the downfall of the king of Babylon. So we should never really use the name Lucifer in connection with Satan. It's not a name of Satan. In the New Testament, it's actually Jesus and not Satan who is described as the morning star, as he is in Revelation chapter 22, verse 16, where he says, I, Jesus, have sent my angel to you, that's to John, with this testimony for the churches. I am the root and offspring of David, the bright morning star. So Jesus applies that term to himself, that identifies himself as being the bright morning star. And Peter uses that phrase as well, the morning star, in 2 Peter chapter 1 and verse 19. So that's just a little aside there, just to give you some extra information about the name Lucifer. But we'll go on now into Job here. So we have a new scene arising here in chapter 1, verses 13 to 22, in which Job is about to be struck by a series of 4 calamities, which will affect him and his family. So the action reverts from what had been taking place in the presence of the Lord. So we come back now to Job, what's going on earth with him. But of course, Job knows nothing about the conversation that has taken place between the adversary and God. And in quick succession, Job is about to be struck by this series of 4 calamities, which will deprive him of his property, his servants, and his children. And the events happen on one specific day when Job's children were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. So we'll read the verses here. Job chapter 1, verse 13 to the end of the chapter, verse 22. It says, one day as his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the house of their eldest brother, a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were ploughing and the she-asses were grazing alongside them, when Sabaeans attacked them and carried them off, and put the boys to the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you. This one was still speaking when another came and said, God's fire fell from heaven, took hold of the sheep and the boys, and burned them up. I alone have escaped to tell you. This one was still speaking when another came and said, a Chaldean formation of 3 columns made a raid on the camels and carried them off and put the boys to the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you. This one was still speaking when another came and said, your sons and your daughters were eating and drinking wine in the house of their eldest brother, when suddenly a mighty wind came from the wilderness. It struck the 4 corners of the house so that it collapsed upon the young people and they died. I alone have escaped to tell you. Then Job arose, tore his robe, cut off his hair, and threw himself on the ground and worshipped. He said, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord has given, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. For all that, Job did not sin, nor did he cast reproach on God. So these events happen on this one particular day when we're told that Job's children were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And we were told in chapter 1 and verse 4 that this was what they did on a regular basis, that it was the custom of his sons to hold feasts, each on his set day in his own home. They would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. So on this particular day, they're in the home of their eldest brother. And a messenger then came to Job with this report: the oxen were ploughing and the she-asses were grazing alongside them when Sabaeans attacked them and carried them off and put the boys to the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you. The Sabaeans were raiders who came from Sheba, the area in Arabia, which was homeland of the Queen of Sheba, the region where she came from, who visited Solomon, mentioned in 1 Kings chapter 10 and verse 1. So these Sabaean raiders come in and they take away Job's oxen and his asses. And we were told in verse 2 of chapter 1 that Job had 500 pairs of oxen and 500 she-asses. So all of these are stolen from him. And they also killed the boys with the sword. The boys here is a word that's used in Hebrew meaning a youth or a lad, a young man, and these are the servants or the attendants, the ones who would have been looking after the animals. And the messenger who arrives is the sole survivor who brings this news to Job. Whilst the first messenger is still speaking, delivering this news, another came along with news of a second disaster. God's fire fell from heaven, took hold of the sheep and the boys and burned them up. I alone have escaped to tell you. Job's flock of sheep numbered 7,000, again as we're told in chapter 1 and verse 2, and here they're burned up by fire which came from heaven. On other occasions, God used fire as a means of judgment, and can think as an example of the destruction of the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, which God destroyed with fire. On other occasions as well, fire used as that means of judgment. But here, the fire that destroyed Job's sheep is not to be seen as an act of judgment for any sin he has committed, but this is part of this test that is going on. And again, in this case as well, the boys or the attendants, the servants, were also killed by the fire, leaving the messenger as the only survivor to bring Job this news. And then, whilst the second messenger is reporting this, then a third arrives with more bad news. A Chaldean formation of 3 columns made a raid on the camels and carried them off and put the boys to the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you. The Chaldeans were from the region of southern Mesopotamia over to the east, bordering the Persian Gulf. Perhaps better known to us as Babylonians, and Nebuchadnezzar, one of the prominent kings, was a Chaldean, and Abraham himself had originated from that region, from Ur of the Chaldeans. So these Chaldean raiders now have come in and they've taken away Job's camels. And Job had 3,000 camels, again from chapter 1 and verse 2. And again, they killed the servants, the boys, with the sword. And again, once again, the messenger is the sole survivor who is bringing this news to Job. Well, a fourth messenger then arrives whilst the third is still speaking, and he reports, your sons and your daughters were eating and drinking wine in the house of their eldest brother, when suddenly a mighty wind came from the wilderness. It struck the 4 corners of the house so that it collapsed upon the young people and they died. I alone have escaped to tell you. Job has 7 sons and 3 daughters, as we're told again, chapter 1 and verse 2, and they're killed when this mighty wind comes, which destroys the house in which they're feasting, and they are killed in this event. So the 4 disasters here all happened in very quick succession, one after the other. Just as news of one disaster is being delivered, another messenger comes along with the news of the next disaster. So these 4 disasters are occurring in quick succession, culminating in the loss of Job's children. and all the way it's written here, the way it's set out, all adds to the drama and the tragedy of this story. The Israelite or Jewish readers of this would recognize these disasters as some of those prescribed by God for disobedience to the covenant that he made with Israel, as we see in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 31 and 32. But again, we should emphasize that these disasters are not coming upon Job because of any disobedience on his part. But this was what God said to Israel in Deuteronomy. These are the consequences of disobedience of the law. Your ox shall be slain before your eyes, and you shall not eat of it. Your ass shall be violently taken away before your face, and shall not be restored to you. Your sheep shall be given to your enemies, and there shall be no one to help you. Your sons and your daughters shall be given to another people, while your eyes look on and fail with longing for them all the day, and it shall not be in the power of your hand to prevent it. So perhaps the original readers of this would have recognized in these disasters a similar kind of thing that God imposed upon Israel as a consequence of their disobedience. Well, we see now in verses 20 to 22 of chapter 1 here, Job's reaction to all of this. It's an expression of his grief as he adopts these signs of mourning. We're told then Job arose, tore his robes, cut off his hair, and threw himself on the ground and worshipped. The word for worshipped here means to prostrate oneself or to bow down. Presumably here he's bowing down to God, as implied in the word translation of it as worship. And then he says, well, remarkable words really. Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord has given, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Job's words here express his acceptance of what has happened to him. There's no complaint. There's no looking for someone to blame. There's no talk of human rights being violated. Simply the acceptance that God is in control of all things. That Job came into the world naked. He came with nothing. And he shall return to the dust of this world naked, with nothing. That's a principle expressed in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 15. Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 15, the writer says, as he came from his mother's womb, he shall go again, naked as he came, and shall take nothing for his toil, which he may carry away in his hand. And Paul in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 7 as well, has a similar point. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. There's a saying that there are no pockets in shrouds. We came with nothing, and we leave with nothing. And here we notice that Job acknowledges that it was the Lord, Yahweh, who provided for him, giving him his possessions and his family, and it is the Lord now who has taken those things away from him. But whether God gives or takes, all Job can do is to bless or to praise the name of the Lord. Blessed be the name of the Lord, he says. And the narrator here notes the devout response of Job to all of this. For all that, Job did not sin, nor did he cast reproach on God. So Job does not react as the adversary said that he would react in chapter 1, verse 11, where in that conversation between God and the adversary, the adversary had said, well, he's only like this, he's only a good person because you're blessing him and blessed him with all of these possessions and you protect him. but lay your hand upon all that he has, and he will surely blaspheme you to your face. Well, that has happened to Job. The Lord has laid his hand upon all that he has, but Job has not blasphemed him to his face. And so the test has failed. But really, this is just the beginning. For Job, the problem will become in understanding why God has done this, why God has allowed these things to happen to him. So the scene changes again now, and we return to events taking place in the presence of the Lord, with a scene very much like the first one that we saw in chapter 1, verses 6 to 12. So we'll read here chapter 2, verses 1 to 6. It says, "One day the divine beings presented themselves before the Lord. The adversary came along with them to present himself before the Lord. The Lord said to the adversary, 'Where have you been?' The adversary answered the Lord, 'I have been roaming all over the earth.' The Lord said to the adversary, 'Have you noticed my servant Job? There is no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil. He still keeps his integrity. So you have incited me against him to destroy him for no good reason.' The adversary answered the Lord, 'Skin for skin. All that a man has he will give up for his life. But lay a hand on his bones and his flesh, and he will surely blaspheme you to your face.' So the Lord said to the adversary, 'See, he is in your power, only spare his life.'" So once again, the divine beings, sons of God or angels, present themselves before the Lord, and again the adversary, the Satan, also presents himself. And the Lord repeats the question to him, asked on the first occasion, "Where have you been?" or "Where have you come from?" And the adversary gives the same answer, "I've been roaming all over the earth." And the Lord again draws the adversary's attention to his servant Job, reaffirming his character in the same way as before. There is no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil. And the Lord then comments on the response of Job to the tragedies, the catastrophes that have befallen him. In verse 3, the Lord says, "He still keeps his integrity, so you have incited me against him to destroy him for no good reason." Job had not reacted as the adversary said he would, and it appears that the adversary had failed in his challenge. The adversary then had incited God to destroy Job for nothing, without cause. God said, "You incited me against him to destroy him for no good reason." Job did not deserve to be treated in this way. And yet, despite the things that have happened to him, Job still clung to his integrity. And so the adversary now seeks to raise the stakes. The first test, well, that wasn't severe enough, didn't go far enough. And so he says now, skin for skin, all that a man has, he will give up for his life. The meaning of this phrase here, skin for skin, is uncertain. It's probably a proverbial saying, meaning something like, well, someone would be prepared to trade someone else's skin in order to save his own skin. So the adversary suggests that really, if his own life is at stake, then a man will be prepared to give up anything. And he implies here that Job was prepared to lose his wealth and his children if his own life was saved, if nothing happened to him personally. He can take all of that. And so the adversary then says, "But lay a hand on his bones and his flesh, and he will surely blaspheme you to your face." So inflict some sort of physical pain on Job himself, on his own body, and surely he will blaspheme the Lord to his face. The Lord responds to this challenge in the same way as he responded to the first challenge, by placing Job in the adversary's power. See, he is in your power, only spare his life. He's in your hand, do whatever you want to him, but don't kill him. And so we read on to the next scene, scene 5 here, in verses 7 to 10. The adversary departed from the presence of the Lord and inflicted a severe inflammation on Job from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. He took a potsherd to scratch himself as he sat in ashes. His wife said to him, "You still keep your integrity. Blaspheme God and die." But he said to her, "You talk as any shameless woman might talk. Should we accept only good from God and not accept evil?" For all that, Job said nothing sinful. So the adversary left the presence of the Lord, and he inflicted a severe inflammation on Job from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. This was a terrible skin condition that affected Job's whole body, from the sole of his feet to the crown of his head. A more precise diagnosis of what this condition was is not possible. Later in the book, in some of his speeches, Job seems to refer to some of the effects of this condition, and we'll notice that when we get to those places. Some of the other versions translate this as loathsome sores, sore boils, painful sores. And the same term is used of the sixth plague brought upon the Egyptians in Exodus chapter 9, verses 8 to 11, when the Egyptians were inflicted with boils or sores. It's the same word that's used, but it's not possible to say precisely what the condition was. We're told here that Job used a potsherd, and that's a broken piece of pottery, to scrape himself to try to bring some relief, and he sat in ashes. The Septuagint Greek version translates this, he took a potsherd in order to scrape the pus, and he sat on the dunghill outside the city. Job is living on the city's rubbish dump as an outcast. This is what the man who was described as being wealthier than anyone in the East, this is what this man has been reduced to, living on the city rubbish dump. Well, Job's wife now makes her only brief appearance in the story. She's not been mentioned earlier, and she's not mentioned again after this. And she observes Job's behavior, and she offers him her advice. You still keep your integrity, blaspheme God and die. Her advice makes good sense if you believe that it's only worth being righteous if you are rewarded for it. What is the point in living a righteous life if you gain nothing by it and even suffer for it? In that case, life is not worth living. So you might as well blaspheme or curse God and die, and so end the suffering, which is exactly what the adversary is trying to prove here. Under the law of Moses, and of course Job doesn't appear to be living under the law of Moses, but under the law of Moses, the penalty for blasphemy was death. In Leviticus chapter 24, verses 13 to 16 mentions that for us. So her advice, blaspheme God and die. It's difficult to really understand what she is proposing or her motive in doing so. Is she mocking or taunting Job, or is she trying to be helpful? Is this her way of trying to advise him, well, the best thing you can do in this situation is just to end it all. you're suffering so much, why don't you just end it? Curse God and then you can die and you'll be set free from your suffering. However, Job dismisses his wife's advice as the talk of any foolish or shameless woman, and he asks her, should we accept only good from God and not accept evil? Again, remarkable words that Job speaks here. And Job accepts that God has the right to bring both good and bad upon us, and it's not for us to pick and choose which we should experience. And if we're willing to accept the good things from God, should we not also be willing to accept it when bad things happen? That God can take away the good things that he has given, and he can inflict pain and suffering and disease as well. But despite his wife's advice, Job, we're told, said nothing sinful. He did not sin with his lips. And so the adversary had failed in his second attempt to get Job to blaspheme God. The final scene in the chapter 2 here, and in the final scene of the prologue of the book, concerns the arrival now of Job's 3 friends. Verses 11 to 13 of chapter 2 says, when Job's 3 friends heard about all these calamities that had befallen him, each came from his home, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. They met together to go and console and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they could not recognize him, and they broke into loud weeping. Each one tore his robe and threw dust into the air onto his head. They sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. None spoke a word to him, for they saw how great was his suffering. Job has these 3 friends who, on hearing of the tragedies, the calamities that had fallen upon Job, agreed to meet up and travel together from their homes to console him and to offer him comfort. And the friends are named here as Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. Nothing for certain is known about who they are. We have no other information about them than what we find here, or really where they come from. Some of the places mentioned here are not identified, but they come. And when they saw Job from a distance, they did not recognize him. Such was the change in this man's appearance. And they broke into weeping. They tore their robes, as Job himself had done in chapter 1 and verse 20, and they threw dust on their heads as expressions of their grief. And they sat with Job on the ground for 7 days and 7 nights, with no one speaking a word to him, as they could see how great his suffering was. They were horrified to see Job in this condition, and they were speechless. And all they could do was to sit alongside him in silence. One commentator has said on this that it was the compassion of a silent presence. Theirs is a silence more eloquent than words, for there was nothing then to be said. Sometimes when you see things that people go through, what can you say to them? Sometimes the best thing is just to say nothing, just to sit with them in silence, as these 3 friends do here on this occasion. So that brings us to the end of the prologue section of the book.